everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. So welcome to both those of you who are following online and to all of you that are present today at the University of Turin. And a first important disclaimer is that this webinar is being recorded, and so I kindly ask those who don't want to appear then in the recording to turn off their webcams. And now a few introductory words about this webinar. I organize it in the context of my research project of a PhD, that is the SAPIENS network. And this is so part of the SAPIENS Network's scientific webinar series. But I was able to combine it with the lecture that that I'm holding for the second year within the course in food system law here at the Master in European Legal Studies at the University of Turin. And so with us today, we have the pleasure of having Professor Silvia Mirate, who, in addition to co-teaching this course, also is a professor of many law disciplines at the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Food Sciences of the University of Turin. And about me, I'm a PhD candidate here at the Law Department, and I'm also part of this research network that is the SAPIENS network that I will introduce at the end of the presentation. And the main topic of this webinar is sustainable public food procurement in the European Union. That is the main focus of my doctoral studies. So the agenda for today is, first of all, a more substantial part on sustainable public food procurement in the EU, followed by an introduction on the EU Deforestation Regulation by Professor Silvia. The importance, then I will address the topic of the importance of this regulation for public procurement. We will open the floor for questions and discussion, and I will conclude and disseminate more about this research program that I'm part of. So my first part is the most substantial. So I will first introduce public procurement and sustainable public procurement, since many of you are not very familiar with this area. And then I will provide an overview of public procurement in the food sector, so public food procurement, and we will understand more about sustainable public food procurement, so what it is about and how to do it. At the end, I will conclude by presenting some leading experiences at the national and local levels. So, what is public procurement? Do you have any idea? No, okay. So, public procurement is the government activity of purchasing goods, services and works that it needs to carry out its functions. So it's a purchasing activity, and for this reason we deal with contracts, public contracts mainly. And so this is used, the public procurement, across all spending functions of government's activities. So education, health, energy, transport, waste management, social protection. And for this reason, it accounts for a significant share of countries' GDP. So the economic value at stake is very high. In the EU, for example, this accounts for 14% of the GDP, that is 2 trillion euros per year. And so public procurement needs to be regulated at the supranational level, so at the European and international level, as we will see, because of its importance and because of the need of removing legal and administrative barriers to trade in this specific market that is the public procurement market. So there is the need to open up competition, because in this way we can ensure we have the best commercial solutions for the public sector. There are common principles and objectives that are always or often present in many systems, public procurement systems, that are value for money, open competition, integrity and accountability, but also non-discrimination and equal treatment of all the candidates to the procedures, transparency and proportionality. We will see these more afterwards. And it is very important to bear in mind how this public procurement activity functions. So it is a cycle. We have different phases. We have the planning phase, where we have to identify what we need as a public buyer and deciding what we want to buy and when. Then we have the awarding phase, where we draft our documents, writing all what we need, and also we place then a contract. So we award the contract to someone that we consider the best contracting partner. And finally, we have the contract execution, so the phase where the contract is actually performed, and a final evaluation on how it went. And we also, when we deal with public procurement, we have to consider a specific terminology. So I will be speaking about contracting authority, that is the public buyer. I will speak about economic operator, that are the private companies that offers a solution to the public. I will speak about tender procedure, that is this procedure when we, as a public buyer, ask for something. Good morning. And an offer, that is the one presented by the private company. And finally, the award. We award the public contract. All these phases must be looked together, because one is essential for the good performance of the other. So we have to consider the cycle altogether. Then, some notions about the legal framework. So public procurement law is composed of a multi-level sources. So we have at the international level the WTO Government Procurement Agreement that was signed in 1994 and reviewed in 2010. And it is mainly based on non-discrimination, transparency, and procedural fairness. And states are parts to this agreement. Then we have at the European level primary legislation, the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union that you also studied before in other lectures, in other classes. And this treaty as well enshrines principles such as equality, non-discrimination, and the free movement of goods, services, and establishment, all of which are applicable to public procurement. And then we have the directives, so secondary legislation, directives on public procurement. We are now at the 6th generation of directives. So we had a lot of reforms, and the last ones, the most relevant for us today is the 2014 Directive number 24 that applies to public sector contracts and public procurement in most of the sectors. And then we have sectoral legislation that, as you know, in the food sector, this sector is highly regulated at the European level, so we have a number of laws that applies, and the European Court of Justice case law. At the national and local level, we also have national legislation that is transposing the directive about public procurement, and also even regulations at the local level. Which is the scope of EU public procurement law? So we said in particular Directive 24. This law applies to contracts that are above a certain value, so only big contracts, above certain thresholds, they are called. These thresholds depends on the contract nature, so whether we are buying works, supplies, or services, and who is the contracting authority, whether it is a central government or a local authority, for example, but also on the specific service at stake. And for us, this is important because catering services, as we will see, are special sectors. And so in this case, when the value is high, we have to publish and advertise across all Europe our tender procedure, because we assume that since the contract is high, we will attract the interest of all economic operators also in other states across the European Union. When we are below threshold procurement, in any case, we have to take into account national procurement laws. And if we have, if the contract has a certain cross-border interest, that means that it could be relevant and interesting also for economic operators in other countries, we also have to bear in mind the principles of the treaty that we said, the freedoms and the fundamental principle of non-discrimination and transparency. Yeah. Then, what is a sustainable public procurement? An introduction. So we saw that public procurement is an activity to fulfill the needs of the contracting authorities, the public buyers, but increasingly there has been a recognition, initially through the case law of the European Court of Justice, of the possibility of going beyond the immediate needs of the public buyers and integrating further social and environmental considerations in their buying procedures. So the directives in 2014 stressed the importance of these considerations, sustainable considerations, as something strategic. And now there are a number of sustainability-related provisions, but many of those are voluntary and just a few are mandatory. But there was a very important shift in the understanding of public procurement. There is not just now focus on the lowest price, you have to buy at the lowest price, lowest cost, but a more cost-effective approach, taking into account the life cycle of the purchase that you do, and also another concept of best value for money that looks not only at the economic dimension, but also broader environmental and social aspects. And so the main idea behind sustainable public procurement is that since we are dealing with a big purchasing of public buyers, because altogether they represent a high share of the economy, they have the ability of orient the market participants and the consumers towards more sustainable choices by including these sustainable considerations in their purchasing activities. So if they direct their power, their purchasing power, in a better way toward better decisions, they can actually have an effect on the market. And this was also recognized by the United Nations in one of the Sustainable Development Goals, the number 12, where there is a specific target that speaks about public procurement and the fact of doing sustainable public procurement. So there are these concepts that are growing. GPP means green public procurement, so is the procurement mainly concerned about environmental considerations. Then we have a socially responsible public procurement that is mainly worried about social issues. And altogether, they form this sustainable public procurement that looks at all the three dimensions of sustainability. And now, what is public food procurement? So we have now an approach that is sectoral, because we are in this course and is also the focus of my research. So we are looking into the activity of governments of procuring the food and the catering services, so supplies or services, for public institutions such as this one, universities, schools, hospitals, prisons, and a lot of other social and welfare institutions. So this has a high relevance because it accounts again for a significant part of national food economies this time, and of the food that some vulnerable groups, such as children, such as elderly and prisoners, consume every day. So we have a responsibility about providing food to these groups. And also it is an area that is connected to many policy areas, because food, as you saw in the course, is connected to agriculture, is connected to trade, to public health, to education, to a lot of aspects. So we need a sectoral approach in this case, and this increases the complexity because we have general sources of general public procurement law, but also specific sources that are, for example, the Codex Alimentarius that you saw probably in the international part on standards, the EU Food Law Corpus, and these voluntary criteria for green public procurement in the food sector. At the national and local level, we have other priority as well. So the system is complex again. We have national systems who has specific priorities for public food procurement, has specific targets, and they want to guide the choices on what type of food to buy for these institutions, from which type of production, and also how to distribute it, to prepare it, to inform the consumer. So there are a lot of different things to take into account. So at this moment, we are dealing with voluntary guidelines, voluntary instruments to orient public food procurement towards sustainability. The directive, that is the General Directive 24, says that it will be responsibility of sector-specific legislation to set mandatory objectives and targets for specific sectors. And with the Green Deal, we had an attempt under the Farm to Fork strategy of introducing this legislative framework for sustainable food systems. And this would have been really a valuable opportunity to to set finally common definitions about what is sustainable food, what is sustainability in the food sector, and also to set the minimum mandatory criteria for sustainable public food procurement. However, this legislative framework is no longer on the agenda of the current Commission, so probably at the end we will not have these mandatory criteria, so we have to deal with voluntary tools and what we have also at the national level. So now I would like to reflect with you about what do you think is, what are the aspects of sustainability that we can include in the dimensions of environment, social and economic, in these dimensions when buying food or contracting catering services, which could be some considerations, some aspects. For example, in the environment, which kind of foods we can, for example, ask that would be more environmentally friendly, or which aspects? Yes, seasonal food and vegetables, that one. 0 kilometer. You immediately chose two of the most controversial from a legal point of view, but yes, the distance could be could impact and the transportation could impact. So the transport, the vehicles that we use more than the distance. The seasonality, yeah, because we consume energy for storage, for the storage of food. Something else, for example, the methods of production, agricultural production. What do you think about, I don't know, organic, for example, the organic production that has a good impact on the preservation of soils, water, and biodiversity? Yeah. Yeah, the social part, exactly. Organic production, exactly. Yes, so environmental considerations, we can think, for example, of also the composition of meals, because if you think about the impact on of meat products rather than vegetables on plant-based products, we can think about designing menus for these public institutions in a way that we choose foods that are less impacting on the environment or on greenhouse gases emissions. Then we have efficient logistics. We have the cleaning products also, because sometimes this is also related to the contracts that we award for managing a public canteen. There is also the use of this kind of products to clean afterwards. And then the waste, so the reduction of waste. If you think that in Europe 1/3 of all the food is wasted, if we want to reduce the environmental impact, we have to start by reducing food waste that is very high even in a public institution and public canteens. And then the social level, we have health and education, for example, fair trade, as they were saying, traceability along the supply chains, but also animal welfare, so how we treat the animals before consuming them, and also the food culture, tradition, so trying to promote products and recipes that are traditional to our countries and cultures, and also building bridges towards with the rural communities, so collaboration and connection. And finally, the economic considerations, so the fair remuneration for producers, the inclusion of SMEs that are the smaller companies, but also, for example, ensuring the resilience of the sector, the food sector, because if you think about the problem that we are experiencing in Europe with the depopulation of rural areas, so a lot of farms are disappearing. So we have to ensure that farmers and food producers can have viable remuneration and be resilient in the long term. So these all accounts for sustainable, what we can do with sustainable public food procurement. As you see, there are a lot of aspects and they merge all the three dimensions. Some challenges. So some challenges that are also more general for sustainable public procurement and sustainability. So we said we need, there is a lot of discretion of public buyers to achieve sustainability, but at the same time we need to guide these public buyers. So we need to balance the fact of having detailed rules and useful guidelines with the flexibility of achieving this goals, sorry, but also set precise and objectively verifiable criteria that is in contrast with the lack of clear legal definitions of what is sustainable food. Also, the need to account for the trade-offs within the three dimensions of sustainability. That is already something very complex in the concept of sustainability itself. And then there is a tendency of and a goal that is the one of relocalizing food systems, so shortening the distance. You said, your colleague said, this kilometer zero concept, so shortening the supply chains between the consumers and the producers, and these objectives are often in contrast with the non-discrimination principle in public procurement, because we cannot favor local producers and local food as such. Then we have to balance these sustainability requirements that cannot be too ambitious if the market, so the private sector, is not ready to offer this, because we have to ensure there is competition in the public market. So it cannot be too restrictive. And also, we have to take into consideration that, as you know, often the sustainability in food comes with a higher price. So public buyers are concerned with budgets, with costs, and so they have to balance this perspective of short-term price, but also with a long-term vision of the possible savings. Because if we eat better food, we can have, for example, savings on public health, so less diseases related to food consumption, or another kind of saving, other kinds of savings from, for example, the preservation of the environment, the reduction of waste. But these two things and time frames must be balanced and taken into consideration. And then we have the need of not facilitating the access to these procedures and these public contracts also to smaller companies. That is sometimes conflicts with the procedures that are too complex. So now let's see how to do it in practice. So some tools, some mechanisms that we can do. This is a very, I will try not to be too specific, but you have the slides on Moodle, so then you can go and see more about the legal nerdy stuff, but we can just provide some examples of the type of tools. So at the beginning, we have to take into consideration the heterogeneous landscape of organization that there is in public food procurement. So there is there are different contexts that need to take that you need to take into consideration. The type of kitchens that we have, central, that is bigger, or on-site kitchens. So, for example, if your school, I don't know, in your experience, if when you went to primary school, for example, you used to have a kitchen inside a school, but this is no longer very common. Then we have to think, if we want to, as a public institution, we want to directly manage the service of catering, so providing food and meals, or we want to outsource it to a private company. So we are going to buy directly food supplies or contract a catering services. And this has an impact on the different activities that we have to worry about as a public body or as outsourced to private companies. So just to bear in mind, you have to do these preliminary considerations, and these are also important elements to consider when we want to replicate best practices. And this is important because for the seminar, I ask you to present the case studies, and so we have to bear in mind these contextual elements that makes the difference on the type of purchase we do. So before launching the tender, it's important to do the planning. The planning, that is to set objectives, what you want to reach, to check whether there are already some policy objectives at the national level or at the local level, in your region, your city, and set targets. normally these kind of projects, sustainable public food procurement projects, starts with pilots or project-framed initiatives. So with a very specific time frame in a very small scale. So because they are very complex, as I said. And then we have to try to align the capacity of the supply, the food supplies of the system that we have at the local levels, so the production, processing and distribution of food, with our demands at the public level. Because, again, it doesn't make sense to ask for sustainability if we are not sure that then this can be actually delivered by private companies in our reality. It is important also to design menus already in a way that takes into consideration the reduction of waste, the valorization of locally available foods, and also the accessibility of procurement. So we can split big procurement procedures into lots, they are called, that are like are parts, smaller parts of the procurement to facilitate the award to smaller companies. Then we have to estimate the value of our contract and accordingly choose the right procedure. And as I was saying, there are specific rules, just for your knowledge, for these catering services and canteen services, because they are considered special services. So there is more discretion at the national level on the rules and more relevance of quality, ensuring quality, affordability of this kind of services. And now about the drafting the tender documents. We have these different ranges of tools here, just for you to understand that there are two main types of tools. Ones that are very are more restrictive because they are we call them must-have. So if you private company don't have these requirements, you don't meet these requirements, you cannot take part in the procurement procedure, you cannot offer your solution. So these are technical specifications and are the characteristics that you want for your work, for your supplies. And these, for example, are if you want specific menus, specific frequency for vegetarian meals, or if you want to buy a certain share percentage, or you want certain products to be organic, if you want your eggs, for example, classified only organic or high quality, you want sustainable fish, these kind of considerations. That is the baseline that you want to have. So companies must meet these requirements. Then we have the contract performance conditions that are requirements that look more into the performance of the contract. So what you want the company to do while performing the contract. This can include also economic, environmental, and social considerations as the technical specifications, and they are also related to dimensions such as the prevention of waste, how to sort waste and dispose waste, which kind of packaging you want. If you want reusable packaging or compostable packaging, you want your caterer to use resource-efficient equipment to cook the meals, or you want to your provider to supply products that are fair trade. You want the caterer to, for example, engage in education and training activities, both for the staff that cooks and prepare the meals, but also for the students. Or also, for example, you want, there are some partnerships to redistribute food surpluses to organizations dealing with these kind of things, no? Food redistribution to people in need. So there are many, many aspects that we can include as contract performance conditions, they are called. They are also mandatory. They are required, will form part of the contract. Then we have our criteria, and these are nice to have, so no longer must have, but it is nice. If you have it, I will give you more points. They are weighted, so according to their importance, they are weighted to give, to evaluate the different offers that we receive from the companies and to decide to whom we want to award our contract. And the contract is awarded to the most economically advantageous tender. Is a concept, this myth that you find in the directive. This just to say that, as I was saying at the beginning, this concept no longer focuses just on the lowest price, that for a long time has been the mantra for public buyers across Europe, but now it says that in order to identify this most advantageous tender, you can also look at the life cycle cost, so the cost from the production of what you're buying to the disposal, so all the cycle, and take into consideration, for example, also the externalities, so the negative environmental externalities. And if you are able to put a value to monetize these externalities, you can include it in the cost to assess the different offers. So these, for example, are criteria that we can use if you want. Let's do an example. We say as a technical specification that is the minimum, we want 30% of products to be organic. And then we say in our criteria that we give extra points to the suppliers who can provide more than 30%. So we set the entry, the more strict requirements lower, or according to the capacity of the market, and then we give extra points, we reward the most sustainable suppliers. Finally, we can ask for labels to prove what the characteristics that we want, the social, environmental, and other characteristics that we want in our purchase. There are specific conditions for the labels. We cannot accept whatever label, so I encourage you to look at the directive to see more in details this. And we need to ensure we also accept equivalent labels, so not to be too restrictive on access of economic operators, companies to these procedures. As you can see here, for the French part of the class, we have some label rouge, so some labels that are mainly used in France and other countries. We have the organic label, the certification of origins, the fair trade, and other about sustainable fishing. Then we have also criteria that look into the supplier, so who we are buying from. These are exclusion grounds, selection grounds. So exclusion, you need to exclude participants if they, you need or you can, if it depends whether the reason is mandatory or discretionary, but in certain conditions, you cannot accept a certain supplier in your tender procedure. And also the selection criteria, so a more positive approach. So you want your tender, your supplier to have some capacities, to have some competencies. And so you can ask, for example, the previous experience in specific areas. So, for example, how do you deal with menu planning? How do you deal with food redistribution to people in need? How do you manage waste, for example? And also here we can use certifications that you saw, the ISO certifications, the environmental management systems certifications, and yeah. Finally, all these requirements and criteria, you have to bear in mind some things. So in general terms, applicable to all of them, they need to be explicitly indicated in the tender documents. So the tender documents must be transparent, so the companies need to know in advance what they have to fulfill and against which kind of criteria they are selected. and evaluated. They need to be precise and objectively verifiable. So you need to explain how you will verify these kind of characteristics of sustainability that you are asking for. And they need to be linked to the subject matter of the contract. That means you have to require something that is connected to what you are purchasing. So you cannot reward in general the fact that the company is engaged in corporate social responsibility or has bigger policies in place. You just need to focus on what you are buying. So if you want fairly traded food, it's not important whether the company only sells fairly traded food. You want for that specific contract, for you, only 100% could be fairly traded products. So this is a very important requirement, the link to the subject matter when it comes to sustainable public food procurement. And then we have the non-discrimination principle that I said many times, and so this has an impact also on the possibility of give preference to a specific geographical area and food. During the execution of the contract, it is very important to monitor the compliance between what we ask for, what we purchase, and what is being actually supplied. And then collect data, because we are lacking data at the European level about the numbers of which kind of sustainable food is being procured by public institutions. And this is important to measure the impacts of these kind of initiatives and track progresses. Finally, for you, I selected France and Italy because there are a lot of French students, but also because they are my two, they are the focus of my research thesis for the PhD. So France and Italy, why? Because they are already moving beyond what is at the European level, so discretion in sustainable public food procurement, and they are moving beyond by adopting some mandatory requirements and some mandatory targets for this area. And then there are also interesting experiences at the local level. So as with any major change, also this transition towards a more sustainable public food procurement is moving at different rates. So there are cities that are leading the way in food waste, for example, reduction, or in the share of organic products. For example, the city of Copenhagen in Denmark almost reached 100% of organic products in all public canteens in the city. So there are very interesting case studies, and it is very important to share and disseminate these best practices. We will look into some of them next week in the seminar, and I encourage you to have a look to this publication, the one by FAO, Public Food Procurement for Sustainable Food Systems and Healthy Diets, where there are a lot of case studies from all over the world. Then we have this other report that focuses also on the experience of Denmark and Copenhagen. I don't know if you know Dordogne in France, but I was there to study. Their approach to sustainable public food procurement in schools. So this report with some carrots on the cover was a publication that I did on the first year after my experience there. And also this final report is a report of School Food for Change. That is another European project that is the biggest one ever financed by the European Union to address sustainability in public meals for schools. So here you have these possible examples to look more into it. And as I was saying, it is very important to disseminate and study more these practices and understand how they did it, but also which are the impacts. So measuring the outcomes of these of sustainability in these spheres. So I conclude with this the first part. And if you have any question now, but we thought about leaving for the end after the presentations, the discussion and questions. But of course, if you have any doubts that you want to say now, also online, please feel free. And then we can move to the second part. No? Sorry, I know it was very full of content, but I hope you found it interesting and related to what you experienced in your life as consumers of food in public canteens. And so we don't have any questions here, and online not as well. So Silvia, if you want to jump in, and I don't know if you have any comments so far, or you want?
No, not at the moment. Thank you, Chiara. And I will just to say hello to my students in the class because I miss you. I'm sorry that I'm online, but I have a lecture at 2:30 here in Asti, and so I couldn't come into the class. And I would like also to thank you, all the colleagues who are online. I'm very pleased to have you here, and I hope that it would be a moment for you of, I don't know, interest in this, I can say, lecture, which is more of law than non of forestry, but maybe can be interesting for you. Just a few words about the EU regulation on deforestation, EUDR. My task today is just to introduce the regulation, and then we will see how the regulation has a very important impact in food public procurement, and this will be Chiara's task again. So we will give the floor to Chiara again after my introduction. So some words about this regulation that has been adopted in 2023. Before starting to analyze the structure of the regulation, I would like to tell you something about forestry law, because I know that our students, they don't study forestry law. So just to say something about the role of forests and how the forests are seen by the law, in particular the international law and the European law. Forest is a very important element in the global life because forests cover 1/3 of the Earth's surface, hosting most of terrestrial biodiversity. In the most recent international laws, such as the Agenda 2030 or also the Forest Strategy in the European Union law, the forestry are recognized as a very important element having a multifunctional role. So they have a function because they have not just a function from the economic point of view, but they have also a very important function in protecting the environment, in protecting biodiversity, in combating climate risk change, and providing ecosystem services, which are very important for humans and in general for the livelihood for 20% of global population. So the impact of the deforestation can be very hard at the level of global warming, biodiversity, and also the protection of soil and the access to fresh water. Also for the human health, the deforestation can have a very important and negative impact. And also from the economic and social point of view, the impact on local communities, where the deforestation can be done, and also the protection of human rights and food security. The deforestation and and in general, the forest degradation is strictly linked with agriculture sector because the 90% of deforestation is driven by agriculture all over the world. So we have a very strong link not only with the sector of agriculture, but also with the international trade in the sector of agriculture. Because we have to consider that we produce very few high demand agricultural commodities, which are often traded in global supply chains. And these commodities are obtained very often through deforestation or by the means of a very important forest degradation. Deforestation and forest degradation cause negative impact to environment, health, human health, not only from the point of view of the pollution, but also from the point of view of the spread of diseases. And so we have a very crucial role in the trade of global supply chain, also played by companies and suppliers that can be a very important actors in mitigating deforestation risks across the sourcing networks. So I think that we can move. Okay, the one thing more that we can say is that there is, at the global level, this is a very important link between the action that can be taken by, for example, the European Union in its system of law, and the relationship with producing countries. So we have a very important link between consuming countries, such as, for example, the member states of the European Union, or the European Union considered as only a single legal system, but also from producing, as I said, producing countries. So there are very important roles from both the point of view, producing countries and consuming countries. We can have a very quick look to the different steps that the European Union action took before coming to the adoption of the EU Deforestation Regulation. The European Union had already adopted two very important legislative instruments in 2003 as a consequence of the 2003 Flagged Action Plan. So we had two regulations, that is the Flagged Regulation of 2005 and the Timber Regulation of 2010. These two regulations were the first instrument in trying to have a solution to the problem of deforestation. But the problem with these two legislations is that they didn't cover all the legal activities related to agriculture because they were just focused on the food sector. The first change happened in 2013, where the European study, when the European Union started to adopt some studies about the impacts of the European consumption on the global deforestation. We have to arrive to 2019 for a very important communication adopted by the Commission, where the Commission did a proposal for a demand-side regulatory measure. So the first idea of having a regulation started here in 2019. This is a very important year because the 2019 is also the year of the Green Deal. So the year of a very big program and planning adopted by the institutions of the European Union in general in protecting environment and in a green approach adopted by the EU institutions to the problem of the climate change, the protection of environment, the protection of biodiversity, and so on. And actually, in the 2019, we had two very important strategies adopted by the European Union, which are the biodiversity strategy the farm to fork strategy, and then in 2021, the forest strategy that is principally focused on the multifunctional role of the forest and the sustainable management of the forest itself. After this period, it was a very important period for planning the ideas of protecting forestry and protecting the biodiversity, the food law sector, and so on. We can come to 2020, where there was a very important parliament request, because in that period, in that year, the parliament asked for the creation of an EU legal framework to reverse EU-driven global deforestation based on mandatory due diligence. This is the first moment where we have the idea of a mandatory due diligence which must be applied to the operators of the food sector, linked to the idea of protecting the forest. We come to the 2021, where we have a very important role of the Commission. Usually, before adopting a regulation in the European Union, we always have a role played by the Commission. In this case, the Commission made a proposal for a regulation in 2021, and then we come to 2023, when the European Union formally adopted the EU Deforestation Regulation number 1115, so the so-called EUDR. What are the main characteristics of this regulation? First of all, we have to explain what a regulation is, because I'm not sure that all the students have a very clear idea of the effect of a regulation, because the regulation is the instrument that usually the European Union adopts in order to have a very strict legislation, a binding legislation that can be applied to all the member states. So the adoption of a regulation is a very important sign, because it shows that the European Union, in this case, wanted to reach a discipline that can be uniform and direct applicable for all the member states. The idea is to reach the maximum level of harmonization between the member states and to avoid the initiative that single member states can adopt without the general framework offered by the European Union. The regulation in this sense differs from the directive, because the directive is another instrument that can be used by the legislation by the European Union institutions, but the directive means an autonomous role of the member states, because the member states, after the directive, have to implement the directive into their national legal systems, and so they have what we call in the legal system a certain margin of appreciation. That is not possible with the regulation, because the regulation gives immediately all the rules to the member states. So the member states must respect all the content, all the discipline given by the regulation. In this sense, the regulation offers a higher legal certainty, and it is very important if the European Union, such as in this case, wanted to reach the application and the respect of the principle of free movement of goods all over the European Union, because the regulation gives the opportunity to have a very uniform discipline all over the territory of the European Union. So this is the reason why the European Union decides to use a regulation instead of a directive. What are the main objectives of the regulation? The main objectives of the regulation can be considered in 3 points. First of all, the regulation aims at minimizing the global deforestation and forest degradation driven by EU consumption, thus reducing, for example, the GHG emissions, the greenhouse gases, and also reducing the biodiversity loss. So this first objective is an objective that is mainly focused on environmental aspects. Then we have a second objective, which is increasing the EU demand for and trade in legal and deforestation-free commodities and products. So the idea is to improving the demand for deforestation-free commodities. And so try to change also the approach of the consumers in this sense. And for example, we will see later with Chiara that this aspect is very important from the point of view of food public procurement, because in the discipline of food public procurement, the application of the deforestation regulation has this specific focus to increasing the use and the demand for deforestation-free commodities and products. And the third objective is promoting sustainable production and consumption patterns in the Union and globally. So the European Union tries also to have a very important role in promoting the sustainability in the food sector, not only as a single subject, but also in a wider point of view, which is the international and the global point of view. What is the EUDR scope? In order to describe the scope of the regulation, we can divide in 3 aspects the main discipline of the regulation, because talking about the scope, we can refer to material, we can refer to the personal, so the subjective element, considering people who are engaged in the application of the regulation, and then also the temporal aspect, so the time for the application of this regulation. Starting from the material, what is important to underline is that with the EUDR, the focus is not only on timber or wood anymore, but the application of the regulation considers many materials. So first of all, the most important and the most relevant commodities, such as cocoa, coffee, soya, cattle, oil, palm, rubber, and then wood, obviously. And also some relevant products which derive from the commodities, such as chocolate, beef, or furniture, in the case for the wood sector. So the scope, starting from the material, the scope of the new regulation is wider than the legislation we had before in the European Union. Then, from the point of view of the subjects, so the actors which are involved in the respect and in the application of the regulation, we have to consider 2 main concepts, because the regulation talks about operators and traders. Who are these subjects? First of all, the operator. An operator is described in the regulation as any natural or legal person who places relevant products on the EU market or exports them from the EU in the course of a commercial activity. So the operator is the first subject, which is involved in the application of the regulation, because it is the subject that places the products in the EU market or exports the products from the EU. Then we have a second concept, the concept of traders. A trader, according to the regulation, a trader is any person in the supply chain other than the operator. So all the other actors who are not the operators, who in the course of a commercial activity makes the relevant product available on the market for distribution, consumption, or use. So in the concept of traders is a concept wider than the concept of operators, because it considers all the subjects involved in the different moments of the supply chain, such as distribution, consumption, or uses of the product. What is also important to say that this is the scope of the EUDR at the moment, but the EUDR is a regulation which is designed as a dynamic system of legislation because it provides the opportunity to be adaptable to the changes that can be occurred in the market or also to the scientific progress. The dynamic system provided by the regulation means that the Commission, the European Union Commission, has the power to extend and to adapt the regulation to the changes that can be occur during the times in the EU market or from the scientific point of view. So it is this is the scope nowadays, the present scope, but it's possible that in the future the scope will change without the need of changing the regulation, because the regulation is provided as a dynamic system that can be adapted to the different needs during the times.
Silvia, I think we should speed up a little bit. Maybe we can.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Yes, sorry. I can just say something going quickly with maybe we can leave the part about the key market access rule. We can just say that the market access rules are very important because the idea of the regulation is that relevant commodities and products cannot be placed or made available on or exported from the EU market unless they are deforestation free, produced in compliance with the relevant legislation of the country of production, and covered by a due diligence statement. We can go quickly through we can go quickly to the obligation for operators and traders. And we can say that the obligation provided by the regulation changes according to the characteristics of the operators. Because for the non-small and medium enterprises, so the SMEs, operators and traders, in this case, the duties are stricter and they have to establish and maintain a due diligence system. They have to perform due diligence, collecting information, data, and documents to prove the product compliance. They have to fulfill the risk assessment, and they have to adopt the mitigation measures. And they have also to submit the due diligence statement to the competent authorities. Competent authorities, which are, for example, in the member states, there is important the role of ministries. So, for example, in Italy, it can be the Minister of Agriculture. And then they have also the obligation to report and to record, to keep the reporting and record. The obligation will apply to the operation and traders from the 30th December of this year, 2024, and for the micro and small enterprises from the 30th June of 2025, so the next year. we can finish just to saying that other key actors that are involved in the proceeding are the member states that have to designate the competent authorities, and also they have to do a continuous reporting to the Commission, because the idea is to create a network of data and exchanges between the different member states and the institution of the European Commission. And then the competent authorities, which are in the member states, the national authorities, such as, for example, ministers of agriculture or other administrative bodies. So I can say that we can stop here because the time is going on very quickly, and the floor is yours, Chiara, please. Sorry for
Thank you very much for your presentation. Actually, we are dealing with topics that are huge, so it's hard to condensate everything in just a lecture. But yeah, so thank you very much. I think we provided an overview, a good overview of this regulation. And now, very briefly, I will skip some parts, but again, you have the slides and you can always ask me for clarification later on. So this part is focusing on the link that exists between this new piece of regulation, legislation, and public procurement. And I want to say that this study, this research, was conducted by me and a colleague of the same project, the SAPIENS network, that is Federica Muscaritoli. So we did this research and we published on our website this working paper that you can easily access. That is exactly exploring this link. So part of this presentation and the slides were developed together. In the regulation, there is an article that is Article 25 that deals with penalties, and it is expressly referring to public procurement as one of the minimum penalties that member states shall include in their national systems. So it says that, as you can see the wording, the penalties must include a temporary exclusion for a maximum period of 12 months from public procurement processes. So first of all, what we can see is that the EUDR establishes a list of minimum penalties that is already suggesting to member states to, not suggesting, but these are minimum, so they are requiring actually, to include in their legal systems. And public procurement is one of these fields that is called used into this regulation to enforce its own provision. So the penalties for the infringement of the regulation could be the exclusion from public procurement. And despite being a regulation, we saw that the regulations are directly applicable, so they ensure legal certainty, all of this. But we have to recognize that we see a certain room for discretion here for member states to lay down rules on penalties. So there is a minimum list, but still some room for maneuver in this respect. So we will see how these provisions will be interpreted and then included in national systems. And then the paragraph 3 of this Article 25 says something interesting, that member states shall notify to the Commission the final judgments against the companies that infringe its own provision and the penalties imposed on them within a specific time frame. And the Commission will publish on its website the list of these judgments, also indicating the relevant penalties. So what we are seeing is a reporting mechanism. So member states are required to provide certain information about these infringements and penalties. And then, based on that, there is the centralization of data on the part of the Commission. So this seems to create a EU-wide disqualification system from public procurement. That means that at the European level, we will have a collection of information about the companies that were sanctioned with the penalty of exclusion from public procurement. So, are we seeing a new ground of exclusion? This is the question of our research paper, and we think that yes, so a piece of legislation that is not Directive 24/2014 that applies to public procurement in Europe, a new piece of legislation is introducing a mandatory exclusion ground, so we need to exclude certain economic operators in the context of tender procedures in Europe, and for the duration that is a maximum of 12 months. So the EUDR has an impact on companies' participation to European public tenders, and it can result, this sanction can result in a significant economic and reputational harm. However, the implementation of this exclusion by contracting authorities, so buyers, public buyers, must be facilitated because they have to easily assess information about the operators that were sanctioned, for example, in another country. So the implementation is not easy at all, and we need to enable and empower these public buyers with training and information. So this regulation is very important for public procurement because also it reflects some trends that are occurring in public procurement at the European level. So we have new mandatory provisions. So we said that sustainable public procurement was mainly based on voluntary provisions. Now we have mandatory requirements that are being introduced in instruments that are that are other than directive, the main legal source of public procurement law at the European level. So we are dealing with a dispersed legal framework that is becoming increasingly complex, in addition to the complexity that already exists of sustainability and putting sustainability into public procurement. So other trends, we are seeing some instruments using exclusion grounds. For example, in France, this is this is something very common. We have national rules where the companies are sanctioned with exclusion from tender procedures because they don't fulfill some obligations that are included in other instruments established in other areas of law. And this is also important, this regulation, because it links human rights and environmental due diligence and public procurement. So the first legal instrument to do so. So now we end this presentation, and I'm sorry if we took some time from the discussion and the questions, but we still have at least five or more minutes for questions and any doubts. I don't know if online there is some comments. There is any comments? No? Thank you. Silvia, do you want to add something?
Yes, I would like to make a reflection, if it's possible, not to take
we don't have any
time. But, what do you think about the solution of the exclusion from the food public procurement of deforestation products or enterprises who use deforestation products or try to make a market of the deforestation products? What do you think that this solution of the exclusion from the food public procurement provided by the regulation can be a real effective solution in combating deforestation? especially linked to the behavior of the European market, and or maybe can be considered other tools always linked to the food sector and food market.
Yeah. This is an hard question, and yeah, the effectiveness will be shown by time, with time, I think, and the fact that yeah, the regulation is will be subject to reviews, periodic reviews, and impact assessment as well will help in understanding its real impact. But what I can say is that yeah, besides food procurement, because in general this exclusion applies to any kind of procurement, so it's not related to what we buy. So even if we are not buying one of the commodities listed, but if the company was sanctioned, we should exclude it. So I think the scope is broad. It can be it can have an impact, but for sure there are some other tools that must be used. And so, for example, the deforestation risks must be taken into account across all the cycle of procurement. So even at the beginning, when we decide what to buy, in our planning decisions, we have to consider how to reduce and mitigate these risks of deforestation, even for commodities and services that we don't find immediately in the regulation, so that are not covered. So I think there is still, it is good, because something that I didn't mention is that another way this regulation impacts on procurement is that at the end, these kind of products that are listed and covered by the regulation will enter on the market, the European market, only if they are deforestation free. So we can assume that public buyers will not have access to products that are still made through deforestation. So in this way, it affects already in a way what public buyers can buy, can find on the European market. But again, I want to say that deforestation needs to be taken into account throughout the procurement. And also, it is very hard, this regulation, I think, to be implemented in practice without collaboration between several actors in producing countries, and so across all the supply chains there need to be new tools of facilitating the transparency, traceability of supply chains that are today very, very complex and hard to follow, to monitor. I would say this. Do you have any other comments?
Because the application of this regulation is finding also many resistances by not only in the European Union, but also by the producing countries, and that can be weird, but also the producing countries have some difficulty for other reasons, but to adapt to this the impact of this regulation. And also, I think that another weak point can be the margin of appreciation, or the wide room for maneuvers that can be left to the member states, because it can be also on different member states, and in particular the different approach that member states can have to the problem. And so in this sense, we can find maybe some differences in the implementation of the penalties and the measures taken by the regulation in the national territories.
Yeah, sure. That was a very important point. We still have to see. The regulation is very new, and we lack all the what will be happening at the national level in national legislation. And in fact, there is a wide space for interpretation. And in this sense, it could have been more direct and clear, the regulation. We have a comment here in class.
We have some messages in the chat. I don't know if you want to look at the chat. There are some messages.
Yes.
There is a question regarding the food procurement for Chiara.
Yes, I have a student now before just coming to the chat.
Please. Sorry.
Is it what? No. Okay, so let's leave it for later. Yes, and online we have a comment and a question about food procurement. I would like to know the available ways to support small companies or farmers in public food procurement, and are there concerns about protection towards local suppliers? Yeah, that's for sure. So local suppliers, as I was saying, is something that is always coming up in the discussions about public food procurement. But we can, there are many tools, many guidelines on how we can facilitate the inclusion of smaller suppliers. And as I was saying, the division into lots is one of those, but is not sufficient. So per se, so we can. I think it is very important to collaborate and to see which is the reality of our local reality. Suppliers, and also trying to engage before with associations and organizations that work with the structuring of the food supply. So to try to convince, for example, farmers to get together, to build cooperatives, because in this way it is easier to manage also the logistics and the administrative complexity of participating to a procurement procedure. And also there are many tools to promote local food. Even from the beginning, when we plan what to buy, we can encourage the use of local varieties. For example, we can give more points to more varieties of apples, for example, or potatoes if we are in a country where we have a lot of varieties. So there are tools. So it's just asking for local food is not allowed unless we have very specific situations. But there are many tools, and I can then provide some tools, some links. We have another question from Mario Pagano about balancing local and fair competition. But again, I think we don't have time to address all these questions, but you can still write to me at the end. I will give you my contacts, and also indicating some, I will indicate some publication on this respect. I'm sorry, but we ran a bit out of time. And so just to conclude, a few words. So as I was saying, I'm part of the SAPIENS network. I just wanted to tell you about this network because I think it represents a good opportunity for you if you want to pursue your academic career and do research. This is a European project, finance project, Horizon 2020. And so is the first training network and academic research project about sustainable public procurement. And we are a network, a very big network, intersectoral, so there are many disciplines, there are many universities involved. We are 10 universities spread across all Europe, 14 research projects, and 19 partner organizations that are also beyond academia. So they are doing the work in the practice, on the field. And we are almost at the end of this project, but we do research, training, and provide open access to sustainable public procurement materials and tools. So some of the tools you can find everything on our website. I invite you to subscribe to our newsletter. We have a free open access course on sustainable public procurement law on our website. We recently published with our network coordinator, who is Professor Roberto Caranta in this university. He co-edited 2 books, one on mandatory sustainability requirements in public procurement and the other one on sustainable food procurement, where I also contributed a chapter on Brazil. And so this is everything available. Some chapters are open access. And at the end, we will have a conference in the 20th of June in Birmingham, our final network conference. You can also join online, and we will present the main findings of our 14 PhD research projects on sustainable public procurement. Thank you very much for your attention and the extra minutes that I took. And I hope you enjoyed the lecture, even if it's very specific. Thank you. And yes, so Silvia, if you want to say some words to the students.
I would just like to thank all the students for their patience, and also thank you our colleagues who are still online. Thank you very much. I will try to send you to our colleagues of the department of the DISAFA the slides if you want. I would be pleased to send to you. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you to Chiara for your very interesting lecture. And I think that we have finished.
As we said, okay. There is here my email. So for the question that I wasn't able to reply to, and also to share further the slides or the material, please do not hesitate to contact me. And, yeah. So thank you very much.
Okay. Yes.